The developer's check was for $2,300,000. It sat in the center of the kitchen table, Valentina's kitchen table, because in 7 years of marriage, I had never quite managed to think of it as mine, like something that had been detonated and was still in the process of exploding. Val sat across from me with her hands folded, a gesture she'd perfected somewhere between her 50s and her 60s. Patient, absolute, requiring nothing except my compliance. Tony stood at the counter, not looking at either of us, doing the thing he always did when his mother and I occupied the same space. He became very interested in the coffee maker. "Sign it," Val said. "Half goes to the family." Not a suggestion, not even a sentence with an implied question mark. A sentence with a period, the way she delivered all sentences she considered already decided. I looked at the check. I looked at her. I thought, for the first time in a very long time, about my grandfather's handwriting. Neat as a surveyor's transit line, deliberate as a property boundary. She'll know what to ask for. She just has to look. Val didn't know I'd read that. She didn't know what else I'd read. She'd had 35 years to believe this story had a single ending, and she'd spent 7 of them making sure I wasn't paying close enough attention to write a different one. She was wrong about that. Grandpa Walt had made sure she would be. But let me tell you how we got here. My grandfather was not a sentimental man. He was a surveyor. He measured things. He drew boundaries. He established, with legal precision, where one person's land ended and another person's began. And he considered this, in some fundamental way, a moral act. Everything that gets stolen, he told me once, when I was 11 and had just accused my cousin Tommy of taking my bicycle, gets stolen because someone forgot to document what was theirs. He handed me a yellow legal pad. "Write it down, Mashka. Name, description, date. Always." I called him Grandpa Walt because Walter Francis Kellner was not the kind of name you deployed in a sentence. And I was not the kind of child who called people by their full names. He was tall, spare, measured in everything, in his movements, his words, his spending. He drove the same Ford pickup for 22 years, not because he couldn't afford a new one, but because the Ford ran and he had no patience for purchasing things that were already working. His hands were enormous, mapped with veins, and when he set them on a drafting table or a property document, they looked like tools built specifically for that purpose. He smelled of pencil shavings and coffee and something faintly mineral that I associated, as a child, with maps. He worked for Raleigh County for 43 years, surveyor, then chief surveyor, then department consultant after he technically retired at 67, but couldn't quite bring himself to stop going in. He knew every parcel in the county's development corridor by heart. He knew where the infrastructure was going before the city council did, because he was the one who measured the land the city council was planning to build on. He watched patterns. He watched growth. He watched, as a professional habit, the way things that seemed fixed turned out to be in motion. He loved me in the specific way that quiet people love, not with declarations, but with time and with small transferred knowledges. He taught me to read a surveyor's plat when I was 12. He took me to land sales at the county recorder's office on summer Saturdays and let me look at the documents. When I told him at 23 that I'd gotten a job as a title researcher at First Meridian Title and Escrow, he nodded once with that particular expression that meant he'd expected it. "You'll be good at it," he said. That was all. It was exactly enough. He died on a Tuesday in October, 84 years old, in his own bed, in his own house, which was the death he'd specified he wanted and the one he got. I drove 3 hours to be there, and when I walked into his room and he opened his eyes and saw me, he said, "There you are." I stayed 4 days. I drove home. He was gone by Friday. The funeral was small and honest, the way he would have wanted. My Aunt Margaret and Uncle Clive from Phoenix. Cousin Tommy, who arrived 20 minutes late and seemed perpetually surprised to find himself in any given situation. A handful of his former colleagues from the county office, men and women in their 70s, who stood in a respectful cluster and shook hands carefully, the way people do when they've spent careers around precise measurements and find imprecision uncomfortable even in grief. I cried at the grave, which I hadn't expected to. I was not a crying person by temperament, and he was not a man who would have wanted a fuss, and I'd had a week to prepare. But there's a difference between knowing that someone is going to stop existing and the actual moment when they do, and I was unprepared for how final the stone sounded when it settled into the ground. Tony stood beside me and held my hand, and that was good. That was the right thing to do. He was good at those moments, the specific, appropriate moments. It was the sustained ones that gave him trouble. Val had not come to the funeral. Bad hip, she'd said on the phone. The drive would be too much. My grandfather had been a person who mattered to me in ways that predated Tony, predated Val, predated the Voss family entirely, and Val had chosen not to mark his passing with her presence. I noted this. I filed it away in the place where I kept things that were true, but that I wasn't yet ready to look at directly. The will reading was 2 weeks later, in my grandfather's lawyer's conference room, a low-ceiling space in a brick building downtown that smelled of old paper and radiator heat. The lawyer's name was Harold Sims, and he had the manner of a man who had been explaining documents to people for 40 years and had arrived at a state of profound, compassionate efficiency. He read quickly but clearly. The house sold, proceeds split between Aunt Margaret and Uncle Clive. The Ford pickup to Tommy, who looked startled and then immediately calculating. The drafting equipment to the county's vocational training program, which Sims delivered with a nod as though confirming something the room already knew. A small savings account to a local land trust for conservation purposes, which nobody had known about and which produced a silence of respectful surprise. And then, to my granddaughter, Maria Kellner Voss, the property known as Lot 14B on Perimeter Road, Raleigh County, deed registered in the name of Walter Francis Kellner as of March 14, 1988, together with all structures and contents thereon. Tommy, which one is Perimeter Road? Sims, a 2-car garage, detached structure, approximately 600 square feet. The parcel itself is 1,200 square feet. Tommy, to me, not unkindly. Did you know about this? Honestly, no. Aunt Margaret, well, a garage. That's practical. There was a pause of the kind that happens when a room full of people is doing the math and arriving at the conclusion that the math is not impressive. Then, from Valentina, Tony had called her that morning and put her on speaker in his car, so she was present as a voice from a cell phone placed face up on the table, came the sentence that I would think about for weeks afterward. Smooth, immediate, warm. Garages are tax liabilities, honey. You should look at selling it before the April assessment. I know a property management contact who handles these things quickly. The smoothness was what I noticed. Not the content, the smoothness, the way it arrived before the moment had finished landing, the way she already had an answer. I filed that away, too. The drive to Perimeter Road took 35 minutes from my office. I went on a Thursday afternoon, taking an early lunch, telling Jamie at the next desk that I had an appointment, which I did, in a manner of speaking. An appointment with a garage. The neighborhood had been, in some earlier decade, a light industrial corridor, small machine shops, a tire distributor, a plant nursery. Most of those had closed or relocated. What was left was a patchwork, a few holdout businesses, some vacant lots behind chain link, a dry cleaning operation that looked like it had been open since 1974. The streets were wide and mostly empty, the sidewalks cracked but functional. I noticed, with the automatic attention of someone who spent 8 hours a day reading land records, that several of the vacant lots had fresh survey stakes in them. Orange-capped aluminum rods driven into the ground at measured intervals, trailing ribbons of pink and orange flagging tape. Survey stakes meant someone was measuring. Someone was measuring because someone was planning. I noticed the stakes. I noticed the direction they were pointing. Then I found Lot 14B. The garage sat on a corner. It was unremarkable. A one-story structure of concrete block and corrugated metal roofing, painted at some point in a beige that had faded to something closer to the color of old bone. A chain-link fence ran along two sides. The lot itself was neat. No trash, no weeds of particular ambition. The concrete apron in front of the rolling door swept clean. Someone had been coming here. The padlock was a heavy brass model, old but well-maintained. The key fit it perfectly. The key. I should explain the key. 3 months before he died, on one of my weekend visits, a Sunday afternoon, my grandfather had set a small object on the kitchen table between us while we were having coffee. An old brass key on a short length of surveyor's chain, the kind used for mechanical distance measurement. Fine linked metal worn smooth by decades of handling. With quiet deliberation, "This is for a door worth opening," he'd said. "Hold on to it." I'd thought he was being poetic. He was 81. He sometimes got poetic toward the end of our visits, in the way that old men sometimes do when they know their inventory of afternoons is finite. I'd taken the key and put it in my jacket pocket and eventually transferred it to my key ring, where it sat for 3 months as a memento. It opened the padlock. I pushed the rolling door up on its track. It went smoothly, recently lubricated. The garage was dark inside for a moment while my eyes adjusted, and then I became aware of two things simultaneously. The smell, which was dry and wild and faintly sweet, something between hay and something else I couldn't immediately name, and the movement. Movement in the back of the garage. Multiple sources of movement. Rustling, shifting, the soft percussion of small clawed feet on concrete. And then, in what I can only describe as an orderly procession, 14 raccoons filed out from behind a wooden partition at the rear of the garage. I stood absolutely still. They were not alarmed. That was the most striking thing. They were not alarmed by me. They moved with the confident, considered gait of animals who had never had a reason to develop alarm. They were, to a creature, remarkably fat. They ranged in size from large to enormous, their ringed tails thick as a man's wrist, their masked faces carrying expressions of unhurried assessment. They circled around me once, with approximately the energy of dogs inspecting a new visitor, and then the majority of them retired to the back of the garage from which they'd come. Except one. The largest of the group, a barrel-shaped animal the color of storm clouds, climbed onto the hood of my car, which I had parked in front of the garage, settled herself into a stable position, and regarded me with flat, black eyes that contained absolutely no uncertainty about her right to be where she was. I looked at her. She looked at me. Then I looked at the garage interior, and I understood that my grandfather had not simply been visiting this garage. He had been maintaining it. The concrete floor was swept. Along one wall ran a sturdy wooden shelf, and on the shelf were 14 water dishes and 14 food dishes, each positioned with surveyor's precision. Each section of shelf was labeled with a strip of masking tape. The labels, in his handwriting: Duke, Duchess, Ramona, Gerald, Valentina, Biscuit, Captain, Pepper, Rosie, Theo, Marble, Scout, Patches, and one label at the far end on which the marker had faded to near invisibility. I could just make out the first two letters, M-O. I looked at the raccoon on my hood. The masking tape on her section of shelf read, Valentina. Okay, Grandpa. In the back of the garage, past the feeding stations and a neatly coiled garden hose and a folding camp chair and a small portable lamp, was a folding table. On the table, precisely centered, a composition notebook with a marbled black and white cover. On the cover, in his handwriting, my name. I dragged the camp chair to the table, sat down, and opened it. She'll know what to ask for. Those were the words on the last page, and I read the last page first, the way I always read things. Structure before content. The instinct of someone who processes documents for a living. Then I went back to the beginning. The first entry was dated March 2019. I started this notebook in March of 2019 because I am 81 years old and I want the record to be clear. He'd written it like a surveyor's report. Dated entries, precise language, no flourishes. The first 12 pages were about the garage itself and about Lot 14B and about a decision he'd made in 1988 when he was 50 years old and working as Raleigh County's senior land surveyor on what was then called the Perimeter Road Infrastructure Study. The study, he explained, was classified as preliminary and internal, not yet public. He was one of 4 surveyors working it. What they found was a clear corridor for long-term development, a strip running northeast from downtown along Perimeter Road that the city had earmarked for eventual commercial intensification. The timeline was 20 to 40 years, depending on growth projections. He understood the timeline would be long. He was, by temperament, a patient man. Lot 14B had come available in 1987, a foreclosure, a previous small business that hadn't survived the recession. He purchased it through a standard county auction for $12,000, which was everything he had in his savings account that year. He registered it not in the family name, not in any trust or LLC, but directly in his personal name, Walter Francis Kellner. He paid the property taxes every year, alone and quietly, for 36 years. I registered it in my name because I knew what the corridor would eventually mean, and I knew that if it was in the family name, there would be arguments. There are always arguments. Property is not the thing that creates conflict in families. It is the thing that makes visible the conflict that was always there. I closed the notebook and opened my phone. Raleigh County GIS portal. Parcel search. Lot 14B, Perimeter Road. Owner of record, Walter Francis Kellner. Last assessed, 2023. Parcel status, active. bequeathed to Maria Kellner Voss per probate filing number 2024-1847. The raccoon on my hood had been replaced at some point in the last few minutes by two smaller raccoons who were investigating my windshield wipers with scientific curiosity. Valentina had apparently departed. I hadn't heard her go. I sat in the camp chair in my dead grandfather's secret office and held my phone and thought, I need to go back to work. I need to pull the development applications for this corridor. Tonight. I went back to work. Not that afternoon. The afternoon was already over by the time I left the garage, my jeans carrying dust from the camp chair, my head carrying something I hadn't had a word for yet. But the next morning, I was at my desk at First Meridian Title and Escrow at 7:15, which was 45 minutes before anyone else arrived, and I pulled up the city's development application database. I want to explain what I do because it matters to understanding what happened next. A title researcher's job is to establish the legal ownership history of a property, to follow the chain of title backward through all its transfers and encumbrances and liens and easements until you reach what we call the root, the point at which the property first entered recorded ownership. You read deeds, you read mortgages, you read court records, you read plats and surveys and easement documents and the minutes of zoning board meetings from 1952. You become, over time, very good at reading things that other people don't know to look for. I searched the development application database using the perimeter road corridor designation. 3 applications came up. The most recent, filed 14 months ago, a mixed-use commercial development plan from Holt Meridian Development Group. Retail on the ground floor, office space above, structured parking on the east end of the corridor. I opened the site plan. The corridor was laid out in detail, parcel by parcel, each one flagged with its current ownership status, its acquisition status, its role in the development footprint. Lot 14B was highlighted in orange. Adjacent to the orange highlight was a notation. Required. Access route to parking structure. Status, unresolved. Every other parcel in the corridor had been resolved, purchased, optioned, or otherwise committed. Every parcel except one. Mine. I put down my coffee. I looked at the screen. I looked at the orange square that was my grandfather's 1,200 square foot lot that he'd bought in 1987 for $12,000 and patiently maintained for 36 years. The parking structure it was blocking was projected to serve a development valued, according to the application's financial summary, at approximately $42 million. Without Lot 14B, there was no parking access. Without parking access, the mixed-use development couldn't meet city code. Without code compliance, there was no development. I thought, holy shit, Grandpa. I thought it very quietly, the way you think things that are too large to say out loud. My colleague Jamie arrived at 8 and said good morning, and I said good morning back, and neither of us sounded different from any other Thursday. But something had shifted in me so fundamentally that I was surprised the office looked the same. I went to the restroom at 9:15 and called Carol. What? You're calling from work. You never call from work. Can I come over Saturday morning? Yes, obviously yes. Are you okay? I'm not sure what I am right now. I'll explain Saturday. Masha, I'm fine. I just need a couple of days to read something before I talk about it. Before I get to Saturday, I need to tell you about Val, because without understanding Val, the rest of this doesn't make sense. And I've spent 7 years trying to understand her, which is the only reason I'm able to explain her now. Valentina Voss, nay Kramer, which she dropped so completely upon marriage that I was 31 years old before I learned her maiden name, was 63, compact, elegant in the specific way of women who have decided that elegance is a form of power and have been practicing it since their 20s. Her hair was silver, cut short and very precisely. Her clothes were always appropriate and always slightly better than the occasion required, which was its own kind of statement. She had opinions about arrangements, of furniture, of schedules, of people, and she exercised them with the patience of someone who understood that the most effective control is the kind that doesn't look like control. She had moved into the Voss family home 3 years after Tony and I married, following Gerald's death. Tony, her son, her particular project, had suggested it. "She's alone, Mash. She doesn't have anyone." This was not precisely true. Val had a sister, a close network of women from her garden committee and her church auxiliary, and a phone that rang with some regularity. What she didn't have was daily access to the mechanisms of her son's life, and that was the lack she intended to address. The mother-in-law suite was Tony's idea, framed as temporary. The temporary lasted 3 years and showed no signs of resolving. In those 3 years, Val had reorganized the kitchen, my system wasn't efficient, established protocols for the thermostat and the grocery shopping and the social calendar, and made it progressively, gently clear that there was a correct way to inhabit this household, and that she was the authority on what that way was. I adapted. I'm not proud of how thoroughly I adapted, looking back. I am a person who knows how to read a document, who can find in a dense stack of legal records the exact sentence that changes everything. And somehow, in my own home, I kept reading the surface when the important text was underneath. The important text was this: the house we lived in, a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs purchased by Gerald and Valentina Voss in 1989, had not been purchased with Gerald's money. Or not entirely. I found that on a Thursday night, 6 days after the funeral, sitting on the garage's camp chair with the notebook in my lap. Page 34. His handwriting, as always, precise. The debt. I need to write this down clearly because I have been carrying it for 30 years and I am tired of carrying things I have not documented. In the spring of 1989, Gerald Voss had come to him. Gerald was in real estate. He'd found a property he wanted, a house in the suburbs that was going to double in value inside a decade. He was certain of it. He'd done the research. He just needed the down payment. He needed $80,000. My grandfather had it. He'd been careful for 20 years. He had savings. Gerald was his daughter's husband's business associate. No, that's wrong. Let me read it again. Gerald was, here I stopped and went back a sentence. My grandfather's daughter, not Tony's father, not Valentina's husband, my grandfather's daughter's husband's best friend's. No, I read it again more carefully. Gerald Voss had been introduced to my grandfather through my Aunt Margaret's husband, Clive, who'd done some business with Gerald in the mid-'80s. Gerald knew Walt was careful with money. He asked through Clive. Walt considered. He said yes. He typed up a promissory note on his typewriter. Both of them signed it. It was notarized by a woman named Ruth Haley at the Raleigh County Recorder's Office on April 14, 1989. The loan was for $80,000 to be repaid over 10 years at 6% annual interest. Gerald made 2 payments, in March and July of 1990. Then he stopped. I raised the subject in 1993. Gerald said he was between investments. I raised it in 1996. Valentina took the call. She said, "My husband is not well. Please don't do this to us." Her voice was very controlled. I let it go. I should not have let it go, but I was 60 years old and I was tired of a fight I could see would be costly, and I was wrong. I raised it a final time in 2004. Valentina took that call also. She said, "Walt, the money is gone. Gerald's business has had difficulties. This is ancient history." She said ancient history, the way people say it when they mean, "I have decided this is not happening." I stopped asking after that. Valentina knows about the debt. She has always known. She is a very intelligent woman. When Tony began seeing Maria, when I met her and understood who she was, I considered, and I believe I was correct to consider, that Val may have encouraged that relationship, at least in part because a Kellner wife would be less likely to look carefully at a Kellner debt. Maria would not want to create conflict for her husband. Val would be careful to see to that. I have watched this for 7 years. I am leaving Lot 14B to Maria because I want her to have something that is hers alone, that cannot be appropriated, that is beyond the reach of anyone in that household's ability to minimize or redirect. I am leaving it to her because I trust her to know what it means. And I am leaving it because I am sorry I did not speak sooner. I was tired, but she isn't. I sat with that for a long time. The lamp on the folding table cast a warm circle of light. Outside, it had gotten dark. The raccoons were moving in their quiet way at the back of the garage. I could hear them rustling, the small sounds of domestic animals settling for the night. I thought about 7 years of Sunday dinners, 7 years of swallowed opinions and reorganized kitchens and graceful retreats from decisions that should have been mine to make. 7 years of honey delivered with the warmth of a scalpel. My grandfather had known. He'd watched it happen, and he'd prepared for it, and he'd left me not just land, but a ledger, an accounting of exactly what was owed and to whom. I wasn't angry. That was the strange thing. I'd expected anger, but what arrived instead was something colder and much more functional. I thought, I need an attorney. I thought, I need to read the rest of this notebook. I thought, I should call Carol. I did all 3 in that order, beginning the next morning. Carol Finch lived 15 minutes from me in a house she rented with 2 cats and a collection of true crime novels that occupied an entire wall and was, she maintained, both research and recreation. She was a paralegal at Greaves and Associates, a small firm that handled mostly family law and some civil litigation. And she was the person I'd called first when Tony's mother had rearranged my kitchen for the 3rd time, and when I'd found out about the thermostat protocol, and when I'd needed, on a Tuesday evening, to hear the voice of someone who was unconditionally on my side. Saturday morning, Carol's kitchen. Strong coffee, the cats circling the table with their particular agenda, morning light coming in sideways through a window that needed cleaning. Carol listened without interrupting, which was a skill she'd developed professionally and deployed for me specifically as an act of love. When I finished, she sat with it for a moment, that characteristic Carol silence, the kind that isn't emptiness but active processing. Then, wait. He surveyed the corridor himself? He registered the lot in his own name in '88? He kept records for 36 years, and the development application has been sitting there for 14 months, with your lot flagged as the only unresolved parcel, and nobody contacted you because nobody knew you owned it. Nobody knew I owned it because nobody knew Grandpa owned it. He kept it completely separate. Your grandfather was playing the longest game. He was a surveyor. He measured things over time. Okay, the debt note. You have photographs of all of it? Photographed every page. She pulled up a calculator on her phone. $80,000, 1989. Compound interest at 6%. 35 years. She showed me the screen. Masha, I know. The number on the screen was not a small number. The number on the screen, purely as a mathematical exercise, represented roughly the purchase price of the house we were currently sitting in, metaphorically speaking. The house where I lived. The house where Valentina Voss had installed herself as the authority on correct living. The house that had been purchased in 1989 with, at least in part, my grandfather's money. What does Val know? She's known about the debt since it happened. He wrote it down. She took the calls when he tried to collect. She told him it was ancient history. Another silence, different quality. And the development corridor. Does she know about that? She had a property management contact ready to offer me a quick sale at the will reading, within 30 seconds of Sims finishing the reading. Carol looked at me. The cats looked at me. The morning light was very clear. She knew what the garage was worth. She knew what the garage was worth. She was planning to have me sell it quickly and cheaply before I had a chance to find out. What an absolute yes. Okay, no, okay, we're going to be methodical about this. She pulled her legal pad out from under a stack of mail. Tell me what you know for certain versus what you're inferring. We spent 2 hours at that table. By the time we were done, the legal pad had 4 columns, and we'd finished the coffee and started a second pot. And Carol had said several more things that I won't reproduce here, but that were accurate assessments of the situation, delivered in language my grandfather would not have used. You need Kenneth Briggs, she said finally. He's the best real property attorney in the county, and he owes me a favor because I found a title error that saved his client's closing last year. I'll call him Monday. Monday. And you need to go to the escape room thing Tuesday. You need something normal before you do anything else. The usual suspects had been meeting on the 3rd Tuesday of every month for 4 years, at whichever escape room venue Carol had booked in advance, which was always Carol, because Carol was the one who maintained the spreadsheet of venues we had and hadn't tried. There were 5 of us, me, Carol, Diane Marsh, Priya Shaw, and Sue Ellen Kowalski. Diane was 56, retired from the county reference library system after 30 years, and possessed of the particular superpower of people who have spent their professional lives finding information that other people couldn't locate. She was small and very still, with silver-streaked hair she wore in a braid, and she had the habit of listening to a conversation and then, several minutes later, contributing a single observation that reoriented everything. Priya was 34, HR manager at a mid-sized logistics company, and she was the group's expert on human behavior, specifically on the behavior of people who were trying to get away with things. She'd once identified a financial fraud at her company by noticing a small inconsistency in an expense report, and she'd said, explaining it afterward, with the calm of someone stating the obvious, people who are hiding something always over-explain. You wait for the over-explanation. Sue Ellen was 40, a licensed real estate agent who sold residential properties in the county with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely loved what she did and was very good at it. She knew property values in a 30-mile radius the way a chef knows ingredients, intuitively, constantly updated, applicable in any combination. We were attempting that Tuesday a Cold War espionage scenario. The room was dressed like a 1970s KGB archive, filing cabinets, wall maps with string lines between pinned locations, a typewriter, actual printed documents in Russian that turned out to be recipes for borscht with a cipher embedded in the ingredient amounts. We were 40 minutes in, and Diane had already decoded most of it. During the break between the archive room and the second chamber, a listening station with an old radio setup and a series of recorded transmissions to parse, I told them, not everything, the bones of it. Sue Ellen stopped moving when I got to the development corridor. Masha, the perimeter road corridor? That project? You know it? That project has been the whispered thing in every commercial real estate conversation in this county for 2 years. Holt Meridian has been assembling that corridor one parcel at a time. The total value when it's built out? She stopped herself. How big did you say the lot is? 1,200 square feet, corner position, right on the access route to the parking structure. They need that lot. There is no version of that project that works without that lot. I've looked at the site plan. Parking access is non-negotiable for the city approvals. So Val knew the lot was in the corridor. She had a quick sale buyer ready. She was going to get Masha to sell before she found out what she had. That's what I'm working out. The buyer was a property management group. I haven't traced it yet. Diane hadn't said anything. She'd been studying the Cold War map on the wall, which may or may not have been coincidental. Now she turned around. You said the notebook is long. Have you read all of it? Almost. There are still a few pages I haven't gotten to. Read it all. Then tell me about the debt. I looked at her. What debt? I told you about the... Read the rest of the notebook first. Then tell me. I read the rest of the notebook that night. The last section I hadn't reached, pages 41 through 53, was dated in the last 18 months. The entries getting shorter as he got older, the handwriting slightly less precise, but no less deliberate. He'd written about the raccoons. He apologized for the raccoons, sort of. They require more management than I anticipated when Rosie had young, which she has done twice, and listed their feeding schedule and a note that Valentina required extra attention to discourage territorial aggression toward the others. He'd written about Tony, with that particular restraint of someone who chooses words carefully because he knows they will be read by a person who loves the subject of them and doesn't want to wound unnecessarily. He'd written about me. Maria is capable of things she has not yet had the occasion to demonstrate. I have watched her read a complicated title document with the same attention I bring to a difficult survey. Patient, systematic, unwilling to stop until she has found the exact place where things stopped making sense. This is a rare quality. Most people are frightened by complexity and pretend it away. She sits with it. I am concerned that she has been sitting with a complexity that is not hers to carry. The Voss household has its own gravity. I have watched it bend her, and I have not said what I should have said, because I am an old man, and old men make their peace with things they cannot change, and I have not always known the difference between peace and abdication. The garage is my correction. I closed the notebook. The house was quiet. Val's light was on under her door. I could hear faintly the sound of her television, one of those home renovation programs she watched in the evenings, where people discover problems with a property that turn out to be fixable. Tony was asleep. I could hear his breathing from the hallway. I sat at the kitchen table with my grandfather's notebook and a glass of water and thought about the shape of things. The lot on Perimeter Road, the development application with its orange highlight, the promissory note typed on a Kellner typewriter in 1989, the LLC that was waiting to receive my property and flip it for a profit I'd never see. The pieces were all there. Each one had been placed carefully. Each one by itself was just a piece. Together, they formed a map. And maps, as my grandfather had taught me, show you exactly where you are. I went back to the garage on Saturday, that time with company. Sue Ellen came, and a contractor she worked with, a large, competent man named Derek, who carried a clipboard and wore steel-toed boots and had, as far as I could tell, a comprehensive and pragmatic view of the world. I didn't warn them about the raccoons. I'm not sure why I didn't. Partly because it seemed like the kind of thing that was better experienced than described. partly because my grandfather's notebook had given me a certain equanimity about them that I recognized might not transfer by explanation. I unlocked the padlock and lifted the rolling door. The raccoons came out in their procession. Derek screamed. It was a full, unguarded scream, the kind that comes before the conscious mind has had a chance to intervene. He backed directly into the chain-link fence with enough force to leave a visible impression, and the clipboard he'd been holding went sideways and hit the concrete and slid under the workbench, where Valentina, who had apparently claimed the workbench as her particular domain, retrieved it with the calm efficiency of someone completing a transaction. What are those? With impressive composure. Don't run. They can sense it. Those are raccoons. Those are 14 raccoons. Why are there 14 raccoons in this? What the? My grandfather kept them. I crouched, made what I hoped was an unthreatening gesture in Valentina's direction, and retrieved the clipboard. She watched me with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who is deciding whether to permit something. She permitted it. I handed the clipboard back to Derek, who received it with the stunned gratitude of a man who had recently been through something. He said 4 more words after that before he regained his professional composure, and I'll omit them in the interest of decorum, but they were accurate to the situation. Sue Ellen walked the lot with her own measuring tape and her phone and her 14 years of market experience, the raccoons observing from various elevated positions with the air of a building committee. She took photographs. She made notes. She was quiet for most of it, which, with Sue Ellen, meant she was doing math. Finally, turning to me, "Okay, straight cash sale, market value, today's pricing, with the development context? You're not under $1 million. Probably 1.2 to 1.5. And if I don't do a straight cash sale? If you go in as a partner, contribute the land, take an equity stake instead of a sale price, you're looking at a completely different conversation. Percentage of a $40 million development, compounding over the build timeline." She did the math on her phone and showed me. I looked at the number. Valentina had settled on the roof of my car again. In the sunlight, she looked like she owned it. "My grandfather was very patient," I said. "He had time. He knew what he was doing." "Yeah, I think he did." On Monday, Carol called Kenneth Briggs. On Tuesday, I met with him. Briggs was in his early 50s, a compact man with reading glasses he wore on a lanyard, and a manner that was simultaneously unhurried and precise. The manner, I thought, of someone who'd been handling complicated situations for long enough to know that panic was inefficient. His office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and it had a view of the county courthouse that I suspected was intentional. I laid everything on his desk: the parcel registration, the notebook photographs, the development application printout, the promissory note photograph. He read each document in silence, with the glasses on, moving methodically through the stack. When he finished, he removed his glasses, folded them, set them on the desk. "How long ago did your grandfather register this parcel?" 1988. 36 years of clear title in his name, bequeathed to you through a properly filed will. The chain is clean. He kept everything. And this is notarized. I have the original. He kept it in the filing cabinet in the garage. Mrs. Kellner Voss, your grandfather did not just leave you land. He left you a legal position. He looked at the documents again, then at me. And leverage. He explained the options the way Briggs explained everything. Clean, sequenced, without dramatic emphasis, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. Option 1, Straight sail to Holt Meridian, market value probably 1.2 to 1.5 million based on current assessments. Option 2, negotiate a land contribution equity deal. She provides the lot, takes a percentage stake in the development, collects over the build timeline. Option 3, use the promissory note in a separate family negotiation. My recommendation, he said, with deliberate care, is not to use option 3 as your opening move. Use it as context. The goal is not to recover the debt. The legal complexity there is significant, 35 years out. The goal is to establish clearly and formally what the moral and financial relationship between your grandfather's estate and the Voss household actually was. That context strengthens your negotiating position on the property deal and explains why you're not splitting proceeds with anyone. I looked at him. The house. They bought it with his money. Yes, and that's on the record now in a notarized document your attorney has photographed. It doesn't have to go to court to do its work. I thought about what my grandfather had written. Leverage. He'd been thinking about this for 20 years. He'd known exactly what tools to leave. I want the equity deal, not the cash sale. I'll contact Holt Meridian's attorney this week. But first, I needed to understand something else. The property management contact that Val had mentioned, the one who would take the garage quickly, before the April assessment. I'd been trying to trace the LLC. On a Thursday evening, using the county's registered agent database and approximately 40 minutes of the kind of document patience that is my professional skill, I found it. The LLC had been registered 2 years earlier. Its name was Perimeter Holdings Group, LLC. Its registered agent was a woman named Patricia Voss. Patricia Voss was Gerald's sister, Val's sister-in-law, a woman I had met at 3 Thanksgiving dinners and 1 4th of July, and who had always been perfectly pleasant in a way that had never required me to think about her further. I put my laptop on the kitchen table and sat with that for a while. The LLC had been registered 2 years earlier. The Holt Meridian development application had been filed 14 months earlier. The garage parcel had shown up as the single unresolved issue, flagged, orange, necessary, in the site plan that was accessible to anyone who knew to look for it, including anyone with connections to city development committees, which Val had through her Garden Auxiliaries partnership with the city planning liaison. Val had known. She had known the lot was in the corridor. She had set up a family LLC to act as an intermediary. The plan, as near as I could reconstruct it, I sell the garage quickly, cheaply, thinking I'm making the sensible choice. Perimeter Holdings, Val's LLC, acquires it. Perimeter Holdings then sells or contributes it to Holt Meridian at full development value, pocketing the difference. While the family demand, the demand to split my proceeds, skimmed another portion off the top. I called Carol. Immediately, reading my voice. Come over, now. Yeah? Carol's kitchen, that time at 10 in the evening, a bottle of something red on the table between us. She looked at my laptop screen. She looked at me. She picked up her wine glass and then put it down without drinking. Okay, I need to say something before we talk strategy. And what I need to say is, what an absolutely breathtaking piece of work. She stopped. 35 years. She held that debt for 35 years, kept you from ever knowing, and then another stop. How are you doing? Honestly, I'm fine. I'm very clear, actually. I've been clear since I found the LLC. That's what I'm worried about. But she was looking at me with something more like recognition than worry. Walt knew, she said. He knew she'd try something. He knew. After a moment, quietly, he named a raccoon after her. He named a raccoon after Gerald, too. With a helpless laugh she immediately suppresses. Which one bites? Valentina. Carol stared at me. Then she put her face in her hands and her shoulders shook. And when she looked up, there were tears on her face. But they were the particular tears that happen when something is both devastating and absurd, and you cannot pick which one to feel. Okay. Kenneth Briggs, you're meeting him again Thursday? Thursday at 2. Good. Before that, you should talk to Tony. I looked at my wine. The light through the glass made a red circle on the tablecloth. Tony doesn't know. I know he doesn't know. He's going to have to choose. Probably, yes. She refilled my glass. But that's Thursday. Tonight, you just have to know what you know. I took Tony to the park at the end of the street on a Wednesday evening, away from the house, away from Val's suite, away from the kitchen where she had reorganized my spice rack, and the living room where she had gradually moved my things to make space for hers. We walked to the park, because we used to do that in our first year, before the Voss gravity had organized itself around us, and I thought the location might remind him of a version of himself that existed before it had. He looked at the documents on my phone. He looked at the parcel registration. He looked at the site plan with the orange highlight. He looked at the photograph of the promissory note, which he read 3 times. He was quiet for a long time. The streetlights had come on. A dog barked somewhere a block away, a cheerful, repetitive sound. Dad signed this. Your father borrowed $80,000 from my grandfather in 1989 for the house. People had complicated finances. Debts don't always... Things get... Tony. He made 2 payments. Then he stopped. Your mother took every phone call when my grandfather tried to collect. She told him it was ancient history. She held that debt for 35 years and never said a word. I paused. She also set up an LLC through Patricia to flip my garage before I knew what it was worth. A long silence. You don't know for certain that Mom was involved. Patricia Voss is the registered agent, your aunt. Val has a relationship with the City Planning Committee through the Auxiliary Partnership. She knew about the corridor. He went very still. The dog had stopped barking. The streetlight buzzed faintly in the silence. I didn't know. I know you didn't. I believed that. I had thought carefully about whether I believed it, and I did. Tony was many things. Conflict avoidant, somewhat spineless when the conflict involved his mother, prone to explaining her rather than confronting her. But he was not a schemer. He was a person who had let things happen around him and told himself the comfortable interpretation. That was its own kind of failure, but it was a different one. What are you going to do? I'm meeting with my attorney Thursday. I'm going to negotiate the equity deal with Holt Meridian and handle the property through my own representation. I'm going to establish formally what the promissory note means for my grandfather's estate. And Mom? I looked at him. I'm going to tell her what I know. What happens after that depends on her. We walked back. It was not a comfortable walk, but it was an honest one, which was better than what we'd been having. For 2 days after that, something in Tony shifted. He was quieter at dinner, more attentive, less inclined to facilitate Val's conversational control. He came home one evening with takeout and said, awkward with effort, I talked to her. I told her to back off any decisions about the garage. What did she say? That you were being maneuvered by lawyers, that she was only trying to protect the family. a beat. And what did you say? A pause that told me everything. I said I needed to think about it. The warmth that had been cautiously growing cooled back to its usual temperature. I nodded. Think about it then. Thanksgiving fell 3 weeks after the will reading. Val had organized it, as she organized all social events in the house, with efficiency and meticulous control of the guest list. Her brother and his wife, which meant Patricia Voss, the registered agent, was in my dining room. Their adult children, who were perfectly pleasant and uninvolved. A couple, the Hendersons, who were old friends of the family, the kind of guests who function as audience in social theater. I knew what the dinner was. I came downstairs in a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, a dark blue that my grandmother had once told me was the color of someone who has made a decision. Tony looked at me and then looked at me again, the second time with something that may have been recognition. The meal was a succession of careful pleasantries. Val was at her best, warm, attentive, a perfect hostess in the way that made everything seem effortless, while actually requiring tremendous effort. She refilled glasses, she directed the conversation with small, sure gestures. A redirect here, a pointed compliment there. She was very good. She had been very good at this for a very long time. Dessert was being served when she made her move. She did it through apparent concern, the way skilled people do things through apparent concern. I've been so worried about Masha and the garage situation. These developers, they can be very aggressive with inexperienced parties, and with Walt's estate still in probate? The assessments can change so quickly in development corridors. You really want to act before the speculative interest inflates things artificially. What's the property worth, roughly? Not a great deal. A few $100,000 maybe, in the right conditions. But the tax complications. I set down my fork. The sound was very small in the room. 300 was the floor, I said, as a straight cash sale. The equity deal I'm negotiating with Holt Meridian is considerably different. The table went quiet in that particular way that happens when something unexpected is introduced into a carefully controlled environment. Forks hovered. Someone's wineglass paused midway to someone's mouth. Honey, you really should let me, producing a single folded sheet, setting it on the table between us. Perimeter Holdings Group, LLC, registered 2 years ago. Registered agent, Patricia Voss. I did not look at Patricia. I looked at Valentina. Your office made contact with Holt Meridian's project coordinator 5 days after my grandfather's will was filed with the county. The room was very still. This isn't the time, or, you're right. Would you prefer to discuss the promissory note? $80,000, 1989, Walter Francis Kellner and Gerald Arthur Voss, notarized by Ruth Haley at the county recorder's office on April 14th. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. With 35 years of interest, compounded at the agreed rate, we're looking at a figure that would interest a probate court. I heard Tony exhale, a short, sharp sound. Patricia stood and moved toward the sideboard with her wine glass, which was not about wine. Val's face did something I had never seen it do. It reorganized. Not visibly, she was too controlled for visible reorganization. But the arrangement of her features shifted by some infinitesimal degree, and what was underneath was not the warmth she wore so well. Family matters. You've used that phrase to end conversations for 7 years. I'm not ending this one. I looked at the table, at the Hendersons, who were studying their pie with intense focus, at the cousins, who were exchanging a glance they immediately suppressed, at Patricia, whose back was to us, at Tony, who was looking at his mother. I want everyone in this room to understand what we're actually talking about. My grandfather left me a property that he'd been carefully managing for 36 years, specifically because he understood it would be valuable, and specifically because he wanted me to have something that wasn't subject to anyone else's management. Someone in this family knew what that property was worth and attempted to position herself to profit from my ignorance of it. I picked up my fork. The pie is very good. The guests left in stages. Patricia and her husband first, to Val, kissing her cheek. Long drive, you know how it is. The Hendersons shortly after, with the polite speed of people who had witnessed something they hadn't expected to be part of. The cousins, who had the excuse of their own families to return to. Val went directly to her room. Tony found me in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. He stood in the doorway for a moment, with the expression of a man who has watched something be true in front of him and is adjusting to the cost of that. When were you going to tell me about the promissory note? I turned around. When you stopped telling your mother she needed time to think about things. He flinched, just slightly, just enough. That was rough. Looking at him directly, Tony, the house we live in was bought with my grandfather's money. He documented it. Your mother knew about it for 35 years. She spent the last 7 of them making sure I was the kind of wife who would never look too carefully at anything. I paused. She almost succeeded. I found the notebook by accident. Well, not accident. He left me the key. He told me it was a door worth opening. Tony was quiet for a long time. The dishwasher ran its quiet cycle. The kitchen light hummed faintly. Is that why he left you the garage? He left me the garage because he thought I'd earned it, and because he wanted me to have something that was only mine. Tony picked up a dish towel from the counter. He stood beside me at the counter and began drying what I'd already washed. He didn't say anything for a while, and I let him not say anything, because there are kinds of processing that require silence, and I knew his well enough to recognize this one. Finally, without looking up from the dish, I need to talk to someone, a therapist or, I don't know, I need to figure out. He stopped, tried again. I have been doing something for a long time that I didn't have a name for. Making it easy to look away from things. I think I need to find out why. That's a good thing to find out. We finished the dishes. The night before the closing deadline, I was awake at 2 a.m. Not anxiously awake. The anxiety had resolved itself somewhere around 10 the night before, when I'd finished reading through Briggs's draft agreement one final time and confirmed that it said exactly what I needed it to say. This was a different kind of waking, the specific alertness of someone who knows that a long project is coming to its conclusion and wants to be present for it. I sat at the kitchen table with my grandfather's notebook and the brass key on its surveyor's chain, and a cup of coffee that had gone from hot to warm to an academic question. The house was quiet. Val's light was off. Tony was asleep. I reread the last section of the notebook, the entries from the final 18 months, shorter as he got older, the handwriting slightly changed, but no less deliberate. One entry, 2 months before his death. I have been thinking about what it means to measure something. Not just land, anything. I think measurement is an act of respect. You say, this thing exists. It has boundaries. I am paying close enough attention to know where they are. Most people move through the world without measuring things. They take the measurements they're handed by whoever hands them, and they accept them as true. This is not stupidity. It's just how most people manage. But some people, a few, look at a measurement they've been handed and feel the need to verify it themselves. These are the surveyors. Maria is one of these. She doesn't know it yet about herself, but she is. I turned to the last page. She'll know what to ask for. She just has to look. And Mashka, if you're reading this, I am sorry I let it carry on as long as it did. I was tired. You aren't. Don't be. Outside, on the porch railing, Valentina was sitting in the moonlight. She had been appearing near my car at dawn for 2 weeks. I had started leaving crackers on the storm drain cover outside the house. Not as encouragement exactly, more as acknowledgement. She watched me through the glass with her flat, equitable gaze, her tail wrapped around her feet in a perfect circle. I opened my laptop and composed the email to Briggs that we'd discussed the day before. The final parameters, the equity stake percentage, the conditions. I typed for 45 minutes. The email was precise and thoroughly documented, the way my grandfather had taught me to be. I pressed send. I went to bed. I was asleep within minutes, which surprised me less than it would have a month ago. The meeting with Holt Meridian was in Briggs's conference room. Bradley Holt was there with his project attorney, a woman named Charlotte who had the efficient manner of someone billing by the hour with a clear conscience. Briggs sat beside me with his hands folded on his legal pad, in the posture of someone who is entirely comfortable with the situation. I had asked to see the meeting room beforehand, and I'd stood there for a moment looking at the view. The courthouse, the county building, the city laid out at that particular angle that gave you the sense of it as a system of documented relationships. Property lines, easements, rights of way, all of it invisible from the street, but present and binding. My grandfather had spent 43 years seeing cities this way. It had taken me 9 years in the industry and 1 composition notebook to arrive at the same vantage. Holt opened with the cash offer, the familiar number, $2.3 million, the check from the kitchen table reproduced as a formal term sheet. Then the equity alternative, which his team had prepared, an 8% stake in Phase 1 of the Perimeter Road development, with a buyout option at year 5. I looked at the term sheet. I looked at Briggs, who gave me one precise nod. I'll take the equity deal. At 12%. A small pause. Charlotte made a note. Holt. That's a significant jump from... The lot is the only unresolved parcel in the corridor. Without it, the parking structure access fails city code. Without code compliance, Phase 1 doesn't close. I set a copy of the development application on the table, with Lot 14B's orange notation visible. I know what the parcel is worth to this project. I'd rather not spend the next several months establishing it in a negotiation when we could agree on a reasonable number now. Charlotte and Holt exchanged a brief look, the kind that happens when someone has been more prepared than you anticipated. After a moment, we can discuss 12%. There's one other matter. I produced the documentation Carol had helped me compile. Your office was in contact with Perimeter Holdings Group, LLC, regarding this parcel, on terms that were materially different from what the parcel is actually worth. That contact occurred while I was unaware of what I owned. I'm not pursuing that legally. I want to be clear about that. But I want the record to show that this agreement is between Holt Meridian and my attorney on behalf of the Kellner estate, directly and exclusively, and that no intermediary parties have any claim to any proceeds. Charlotte's pen stopped moving. She looked at the document, then at Holt. Holt, after a longer pause, that's entirely reasonable. We'll add that language to the agreement. We signed at 4:17 in the afternoon. The surveyor's chain fob on my keyring pressed into my palm when I picked up the pen. Outside Briggs's building, the October air was very clear, the kind of clarity you get after a long period of overcast, where everything looks slightly more defined than usual, where distances are legible. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and called Carol. Well, 12% equity stake. language on record that no third party has a claim. A silence on Carol's end. Then, Masha, I know. Walt would have. He would have. Yeah. I sat Val down in the living room the next evening. I asked Tony to be present, and he came without argument, settling into the armchair in the corner in the posture of someone who has decided to be a witness. I was grateful for his being there, even if I hadn't needed his support to get through the last month. The decision to be a witness is not a small one. It can grow. I told Val what the equity agreement said and what it meant. I told her about the LLC documentation and the language in the agreement excluding third-party claims. I told her about the promissory note and that it had been formally entered into the estate record by Briggs. She listened with perfect composure. When I finished, she sat for a moment with her hands folded on her knee, that habitual posture, and then said, "You didn't have to do this way. Family. You've used that word as a door I was supposed to walk through and not ask where it led. I'm done walking through it." I paused. You held a debt for 35 years that bought the house I've been living in and never said a word. You tried to move my property through an LLC while I was uninformed of its value. I know both of these things, and they're documented, and my attorney has copies of everything. I'm not taking this to court. That's not what I want. But I want you to understand that I know. I made this family, but cleanly, not sharply. You leveraged this family. There's a difference. She said nothing. The silence was the specific kind that happens when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, when the surface of things has finally matched what was underneath. I stood. The guest suite will be available at the end of the month. I've pulled 3 listings in your price range. Kenneth's assistant can send them over, or you can look yourself. They're all reasonable. I walked out of the living room. I went upstairs. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Tony say something to his mother. Quiet. Too quiet to catch the words. I heard her response, also quiet. Then I heard his footsteps on the stairs. 8 months later, this is where things stand. Tony and I moved into a rental, a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city, smaller than the Voss house, louder in the mornings because of the traffic below, and the couple in 3B who seemed to do their most significant emotional processing early on Saturday. The lease is in my name and Tony's, equally. The bedroom window faces east, which means we get the morning light, which turns out to matter more than I'd expected. The divorce did not happen. I want to be precise about that. The divorce was discussed, seriously, in the months after Thanksgiving. Tony moved out temporarily. He stayed with a college friend, and we had the kind of sustained, honest conversations about our actual situation that we should have been having for years. He saw a therapist. I saw a therapist. We had a 3-hour conversation in a parking lot at 11 at night that I think was the realest conversation of our marriage. He said things that were hard to say, and he said them anyway. That was what I'd needed to know he could do. He chose to stay. I chose to let him. Neither choice was simple or cost-free, and both of them were ours to make. Val is in a condominium in Fairfield, 20 minutes away. She calls Tony twice a week. She does not call me. This is, on balance, fine. The Perimeter Road development broke ground in March. I get project update emails from Hope Meridian's communications team, and I read them at my desk at First Meridian over my morning coffee, which still seems slightly surreal in the best possible way. Briggs says the Phase 1 completion is on track for mid-next year. Sue Ellen sent me a bottle of good wine when the equity papers were filed. Diane, at our most recent escape room session, a Victorian mystery scenario that Diane solved with 23 minutes still on the clock, which was a new record, had said during the wrap-up, with her particular quiet precision. Your grandfather was a very good surveyor. I'd thought about that for the drive home. He had been. He'd measured things accurately. Land, time, people, what could be leveraged and when and how. He'd measured his own limitations, too, and been honest enough about them to correct for them. The garage itself was legally cleared as part of the development agreement, the transfer complete and tidy. Before the clearing, I went one last time. I walked through it. The feeding shelf, the camp chair, the lamp, the folding table where he'd sat and written things down. The raccoons had been relocated by a wildlife service to a nature corridor about 12 miles out, which sounded more poetic than it probably was, but I chose to appreciate the poetry regardless. Except for Valentina. Valentina had, apparently, made alternative arrangements. She appeared in the parking lot of our new apartment building 6 days after we moved in, established territorial rights over a storm drain near the entrance, and proceeded to ignore all attempts at relocation by Earl, the building super, who was a patient man, but who had been bested comprehensively. Resigned, the fourth morning she was still there. "She's just here now," he told me, on my way to work. Without breaking stride, "Yes, she is." I leave crackers on the storm drain cover. She takes them. "We have reached an understanding that does not require further discussion. The brass key is still on my keychain. It's heavy and impractical. The surveyor's chain fob scratches things and catches on zippers, and I have thought about taking it off a number of times. I don't. Every time I unlock the apartment door, I feel the specific weight of it in my palm, that small, deliberate mass. He was right about what it opened. I've thought about him a great deal over the last 8 months. Not with grief exactly, or not only. Grief for something you had and lost is different from grief for someone you understood fully only after they were gone. And what I've done is the second kind. I've thought about the image of him that I will carry from now on. Not the old man with coffee and the poetic key, not the figure at the graveside, but the one I've assembled from his notebook. The 50-year-old surveyor at a county land auction in 1987, seeing a corridor that no one else was looking at yet, writing things down, measuring, being patient, doing the work of someone who knows that documentation is a moral act and that time rewards the person who was paying attention before anyone else thought to look. He gave me a door worth opening. I opened it.